Viktor Petrov was trying to charter a private jet from Los Angeles to New York when company manager David Chen told him, "Your medical history poses a flight risk." Viktor smiled because he owned the charter company and had 15,000 hours of pilot experience. Elite Aviation Services at Van Nuys Airport was one of California's most prestigious private jet charter companies, a fleet of 47 luxury aircraft, from Gulfstream G650 to Bombardier Global 7500, the preferred aviation service provider for Fortune 500 CEOs, Hollywood celebrities, and political figures. Average charter fee, $8,000 to $15,000 per hour. Viktor Petrov, 44 years old, Ukrainian veteran pilot and aviation entrepreneur, had limited mobility in his left arm due to shrapnel injury in the war in Kharkiv, but his aviation skills remained intact. 13 years since coming to America, now CEO of Petrov Aviation Holdings, the West Coast's largest private aviation empire, 127 aircraft, 8 FBO locations, $2.4 billion portfolio. David Chen, 36 years old, Elite Aviation's operations manager, USC Business School graduate, 11 years in aviation industry, but mostly administrative background. No pilot license, limited technical aviation knowledge, but obsessive about customer risk assessment. This morning, Viktor wanted jet charter service for a routine business trip. "Good morning. Welcome to Elite Aviation," David greeted professionally, his smile confident as he gestured toward the luxurious client lounge. "I understand you're interested in charter services to New York?" "Yes, I need a flight this afternoon," Viktor replied, his Ukrainian accent slight but noticeable, his left arm moving somewhat stiffly as he adjusted his briefcase. David immediately noticed the arm mobility issue, his mental checklist activated. Foreign accent, possible medical condition, unfamiliar client. "Of course, sir. Let me start with our standard client assessment form." David handed over a comprehensive questionnaire: financial verification, identification requirements, travel purpose, medical history. "Medical history?" Viktor questioned, scanning the form. "Standard procedure," David explained. "FAA regulations require us to assess passenger fitness for flight, especially for international clients or those with potential medical considerations." This was partially true. Charter companies did have some medical screening requirements, but David's interpretation was overly broad and discriminatory. Viktor filled out basic information but hesitated at medical questions. "I'm a licensed pilot myself. I understand aviation medical requirements." David's eyebrows raised. "You're a pilot? What type of license?" "Airline transport pilot, current medical certificate, instrument rating," Viktor answered matter-of-factly. David was skeptical. The man's arm mobility seemed compromised, and foreign pilots often had questionable credentials or expired certifications. "We need to analyze our audience. If you could tell us where you watched our video in the comments section and also hit the like button, that would make us very happy." "Sir, I need to be direct," David said, reviewing Viktor's form. "I notice you have some physical limitations with your left arm. This could impact emergency procedures during flight." "Emergency procedures?" Viktor asked calmly. "Exit assistance, oxygen mask deployment, emergency position requirements. Our insurance company is very strict about passengers who might compromise safety protocols." Viktor remained patient. "I'm medically cleared for flight operations, including as pilot in command." "That may be true in Ukraine," David said dismissively, "but American aviation standards are much more rigorous. We need documentation from FAA certified medical examiners." This was discriminatory nonsense. Viktor's U.S. pilot medical certificate was issued by FAA certified doctors and was current. "I have current FAA medical certification," Viktor clarified. David appeared surprised but remained skeptical. Even so, as a passenger, different standards apply. "Our liability insurance specifically excludes coverage for passengers with undisclosed medical conditions." "What medical condition?" Viktor asked directly. "Well, your arm mobility appears compromised. Previous trauma, perhaps military service? These conditions can cause in-flight medical emergencies." Viktor's jaw tightened slightly. David was making assumptions based on appearance and accent, creating insurance excuses that didn't exist. "Could I see your pilot credentials?" David asked, still doubting Viktor's qualifications. Viktor handed over his pilot certificate and medical documentation. Everything was legitimate, current, and impressive. ATP certificate, instrument rating, multi-engine rating, 15,247 total flight hours. David examined the documents with growing confusion. The credentials were real, extensive, and far superior to most private pilots, but his bias remained focused on Viktor's accent and physical appearance. "These flight hours seem unusually high," David said suspiciously. 15,000 hours is airline captain level. Most private pilots have 500 to 2,000 hours. "I flew commercially in Ukraine and have been flying in the U.S. for 13 years, Viktor explained. Commercial flying in Ukraine. David's tone suggested he questioned foreign aviation standards. American commercial aviation requirements are much more stringent. "I'm type-rated on Gulfstream, Bombardier, Cessna Citation, and Boeing aircraft," Viktor added patiently. David was running out of technical objections. Viktor's qualifications were extraordinary. But the accent, the arm mobility, and unfamiliarity triggered his discrimination instincts. "Sir, our pilots need to verify your currency and competency before approving charter services," David announced, creating another bureaucratic barrier. "Competency verification," Viktor repeated. "Yes, we require demonstration flights or check rides for pilots who want to charter our aircraft, especially international pilots with unique circumstances." This was completely fabricated. Charter companies don't require passenger pilots to demonstrate competency unless they're planning to fly the aircraft themselves. "I'm chartering as a passenger, not pilot in command," Viktor clarified. "Nevertheless, our insurance requires additional scrutiny for passengers with aviation backgrounds and medical considerations. The combination creates liability concerns." David was weaving together insurance, medical, and aviation terminology to create seemingly legitimate grounds for discrimination. "What additional scrutiny?" Viktor asked. "Medical clearance from our aviation medical examiner, competency demonstration, background verification, financial qualification confirmation." Financial qualification? "Charter services at this level require significant resources. Our flights cost $12,000 to $18,000 for New York routes. We need verification of payment capability." Now, David was questioning Viktor's financial ability based on assumptions about foreign clients and perceived disability. Viktor pulled out his Platinum American Express Centurion card. "Will this suffice for payment verification?" David took the card reluctantly. Centurion cards required $250,000 plus annual spending and invitation-only membership. This man clearly had substantial wealth. While David processed Viktor's payment information, Viktor's phone rang. Caller ID, FAA Flight Standards, direct line. "Excuse me," Viktor said, answering. "Hello, Inspector Williams." David could hear the conversation. "Viktor, we need to discuss the new pilot training standards for your fleet. Are you available for a conference call this afternoon? I'm actually arranging charter services to New York. Could we schedule for tomorrow morning?" "Of course. By the way, how's the expansion going? I heard you acquired another 3 FBOs this quarter." David's attention sharpened. FAA officials discussing fleet operations and FBO acquisitions? This passenger wasn't just a pilot. He was apparently a significant aviation business owner. "Yes, the Scottsdale and Phoenix acquisitions are complete. Denver closes next month," Viktor replied. "Outstanding. Text me when you're back from New York. We'll finalize the training center certification." Viktor hung up and noticed David staring at him with new curiosity. "FAA business?" David asked carefully. "Routine operational discussions," Viktor replied modestly. David's mental framework was shifting. FAA officials don't have casual conversations with small-time pilots. This man apparently owned multiple FBOs and was expanding aviation operations. While Viktor waited in the client lounge, David discreetly researched Petrov Aviation Holdings on his computer. What he found made his blood run cold. Petrov Aviation Holdings, West Coast's largest private aviation company. Fleet of 127 aircraft, 8 FBO locations from Seattle to San Diego. Annual revenue, $847 million. CEO, Viktor Petrov. David's hand started trembling as he read further. Viktor Petrov wasn't just a customer. He owned one of the largest aviation companies on the West Coast. Elite Aviation was a tiny operation compared to Petrov Holdings. Worse yet, David discovered that Elite Aviation had been trying to secure a management contract with Petrov Holdings for 2 years. Their biggest potential client was sitting in their lobby, and David had just spent an hour discriminating against him. David's phone buzzed with a text from his CEO. Petrov Holdings meeting confirmed for next week. This could be our biggest contract ever. Make sure everything goes perfectly. David realized he had just destroyed his company's most important business relationship through pure prejudice and ignorance. David approached Viktor with newfound nervousness. Mr. Petrov, I want to apologize for the extensive verification process. Sometimes our procedures are overly thorough. Viktor looked up from his phone calmly. Procedures can be important for safety and compliance. Absolutely, David agreed quickly. I've reviewed your documentation, and everything appears to be in perfect order. We can have your aircraft ready within an hour. Thank you, Viktor replied politely. David was desperate to repair the damage. If I may ask, you seem very familiar with aviation operations. Do you work in the industry? I own a small aviation business, Viktor answered modestly. Really? What kind of operation? Aircraft management, charter services, pilot training, FBO operations, Viktor listed casually. David's stomach dropped. Viktor owned exactly the kind of comprehensive aviation company that Elite Aviation aspired to become. That's fascinating, David said weakly. Perhaps we could discuss potential collaboration opportunities. Viktor's phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed Boeing Defense, Executive Sales. Viktor answered the Boeing call on speaker. Hello, Jennifer? Viktor, the military transport contract specifications are ready for review. Can your team handle the maintenance requirements for the additional 23 aircraft? Certainly. Our maintenance facilities in Long Beach and San Francisco can accommodate the full fleet. Excellent. The Pentagon is very pleased with your company's performance on the current contract. David listened in growing horror. Pentagon contracts? Military aircraft maintenance? Viktor's company was operating at levels David hadn't even imagined. After the call ended, David could barely speak. Mr. Petrov, I owe you a profound apology. I had no idea about the scope of your aviation experience. What scope? Viktor asked innocently. Your company, your military contracts, your fleet operations. I clearly misjudged your qualifications. You judged me based on my accent and arm mobility, Viktor said quietly, not my qualifications. David's face went red. He couldn't deny the truth. Furthermore, Viktor continued, I believe Elite Aviation has been seeking a management contract with my company. David nodded miserably. Yes, sir. It would be the largest contract in our company's history. And you just spent an hour explaining why I'm unfit to be your passenger due to medical incompetency concerns. The irony was devastating. David had discriminated against the one person who could transform their business. Viktor's final phone call came from Elite Aviation's CEO, Michael Roberts, who had just learned that Viktor Petrov was in their facility. Viktor! Michael's panicked voice was audible across the room. I just heard you're at our Van Nuys location. I'm so sorry I wasn't there to greet you personally. Hello, Michael. I was arranging charter services for a business trip. Of course. David Chen is taking excellent care of you, I'm sure. We're so excited about next week's partnership discussion. Viktor looked at David, who had gone completely pale. Actually, Michael, David has some concerns about my fitness as a passenger. Silence on the phone. Then, what concerns? Medical limitations, competency questions, insurance liability issues. Viktor listed David's objections. David said what? Michael's voice rose dangerously. Perhaps you should speak with David directly, Viktor suggested, handing his phone to the terrified operations manager. Michael's voice exploded through the speaker. David, what the hell have you done? You just told our biggest potential partner that he's unfit to fly. David could barely respond. Sir, I didn't know who he was. You didn't know because you made assumptions based on his accent and appearance. Do you realize you've just cost us a $200 million contract? 6 months later, Elite Aviation implemented comprehensive anti-discrimination training focused on unconscious bias in aviation services. David Chen was terminated immediately and never worked in aviation again. Viktor Petrov decided not to pursue the management contract with Elite Aviation, instead choosing a competitor who demonstrated inclusive customer service. Elite Aviation lost their largest potential client due to one employee's prejudice. Most importantly, Viktor established the Veterans Aviation Access Foundation, providing flight training scholarships and legal advocacy for disabled veterans facing discrimination in aviation services. The foundation worked with the FAA to strengthen anti-discrimination policies in commercial aviation, ensuring that war injuries never become barriers to flight operations or services. Viktor continues flying commercially and personally, with over 16,000 flight hours now. His company has grown to 156 aircraft and 12 FBO locations, proving that assumptions about physical limitations are more restrictive than any actual disability. Elite Aviation's former office now displays a plaque. Excellence in aviation serves everyone, no exceptions. Sometimes the person you ground never needed your permission to fly, and sometimes the pilot you question owns the sky you're trying to reach.